Welcome back to Buckeye Talk, and hear ye, Ohio State has a quarterbacks. Yeah, I'll put that S on it for a reason there. Nathan, we found out who Ohio State's starting quarterback is, but it also kind of came with an asterisk. Who was the name that Ryan Day said, but then also provide some context for us. What's going to happen on Saturday?
The second week in a row, the first question he gets is, "Hey, you got a quarterback?" And he says, "Yes." But this week he actually did have. He meant yes. He had a starting quarterback, and it's Kyle McCord, and that's what we have thought for a while that this was trending towards, even as it hung up a little bit. And Ryan Day is disclosing now there were times where Devin Brown had pulled ahead into the lead behind the scenes preseason camp. We only got to see a little bit, as people know, but and especially the way I thought last week's press conference went. This is the outcome that I thought it was leading towards. That Kyle McCord was going to start this game, but that Devin Brown, as Ryan Day says it, he wants him to play substantial snaps in the first half. Substantial in terms of quality, not necessarily quantity. He's not getting into he's being very vague as to exactly how this will all split up in terms of who plays when and that sort of thing. And as I texted to people on Tuesday morning, I expected that too. I think Ryan Day is going to keep it. There's no reason to put out a plan because then you have to sort of follow this plan. I think it makes more sense to just keep things vague and let there be a little bit of a feel element to it. But I don't want to underestimate, by talking about the two quarterbacks, that there is, I think, some significance that he's named Kyle McCord the starter, at least for this first game. It does mean that he won something. And the way that he described it today was that Kyle McCord was better than Devin Brown in some of the things over the past week or two that decided who should start this game. And I think that has some value. I think that needs to be recognized, that it wasn't just pulling a name out of a hat, wasn't just default going to the older guy. He's saying he played more consistently. I think they trust him a little bit more to take care of the ball based on what we've seen in practices and scrimmages and things like that. So Kyle McCord gets the first shot, and it's one of those things where, yes, he's saying the plan is for Devin Brown to play. But if Kyle McCord leads 4 laser show touchdown drives to start this game, we could actually have a discussion about whether that makes it more or less likely that Devin Brown would play. Because at some point you would maybe be like, oh, okay, well, whatever. It's 28-3. Let's give Devin Brown a shot. But you might also say, hey, this is cooking. Maybe we don't want to mess with this. So being the starter puts you in the driver's seat a little bit. I think this competition is still going, but it puts you in the lead for sure. It establishes a lead. And now more than ever, it gives Kyle McCord an opportunity to go out and sort of, put an exclamation point on that.
He says Devin Brown made a strong push about 10 days ago, about 2 weeks ago. Devin Brown really made a push. And I think that's that's around the time when at least there are people in our texters and in our comments on our YouTube channel. Go subscribe to our YouTube channel. Just type in Buckeye Talk on YouTube and then subscribe. We do videos there too. People were wondering what's going on with Devin Brown. That's when that started to ramp up a little bit. But then he said Kyle McCord responded with consistent play. We're gonna get into how we think this might work out later on in this pod. I think that's gonna be the gist of this pod. But Andrew, you're coming into this still kind of fresh faced as all this stuff, and in the limited practice time we've seen, it looked like Kyle McCord had the slightly better day. Now we didn't get to see much, but at least from the way you've read about this coming into this, what we've heard so far, how we've talked about this, one, are you shocked that Kyle McCord gets the start? Even if regardless of how it actually plays out, are you at all surprised that Kyle McCord is the guy who's going to take the first snap against Indiana?
No. This is what I read. This is what I saw. This is what I heard just kind of for the last couple of weeks. It kind of felt like that McCord was always the guy who, they might look like they're on the same path, but McCord always kind of had the inside track. So you knew he had a little bit of an advantage. To me, I think it was a couple of weeks ago where we talked about this, and Nathan said something like, if it's truly a coin flip, if it's truly a toss-up, why not just, walk out to midfield and pick a name out of a hat, and there's the starter. You have to pick somebody to be the starter, and he's right. You're talking about a situation with McCord where he's the guy. he's the guy you're starting, and he's right, that matters. I think that is something. I think if you had asked me a week ago, I would have probably started to trend this direction. 2 weeks ago, I think you could have made more of a case for Devin Brown, but I just think the closer you got, the more you just kind of assume, look, if it's really this close, they're just going to rely on the guy who actually has college football experience, who actually has seen some of this stuff. You wanted to go with a little bit of that. So I think the longer that this went, I think it maybe, when it started, everybody thought it was McCord. Then it kind of looked like Devin Brown could win the job. And then I think over the last week or so, I think it probably made sense to just say, you know what? If it's really this close, experience, I think, is probably the deciding factor.
Nathan, how many weeks do you think this goes? How many weeks until Day actually locks in? Because he does kind of have a preseason thing going on here. Because Indiana, yes, that's a road Big Ten game, so there's going to be a level of difficulty there, even if you think Ohio State's going to win and they're favored by 30 points. But then you're playing, two FCS schools, Western Kentucky and Youngstown State, one FCS school and another school that's just not at the same level as Ohio State. How many? Just based on the way Ryan Day talked today, how many weeks do we think he does this before he actually has to sit down and pick one?
Western Kentucky actually might be better than Indiana, so we'll revisit that in a couple of weeks, I suppose.
That's fair.
but which says as much about Western Kentucky as it does about Indiana. Frankly, they've had a good program, but that's not at all what anybody wants to hear me talking about right now. I don't know. I don't know how many weeks it goes. I think anything is possible right now in terms of what I was saying before. Like if Kyle McCord just comes out and tears it up, and clearly there is you got some rapport there, and the offense looks in sync. I think it's there for him to just come out and take the starting job by command. I think at some point you want to get to a point where one of these two guys gets to take full command of the number one offense, not just on game days, but throughout the week. Not that the other guy doesn't get a few reps also to stay prepared, but the one guy gets a lion's share of those things. So just to keep building your offensive cohesion. But let's also not forget the last time this situation arose, like 2021, CJ Stroud going on the road, like Minnesota led that game at halftime. And now that Minnesota team was better than this Indiana team by, I think, any measure. But it's still like you can't be a given that Ohio State necessarily going to just go in and blow the doors off the place. And I think the last time they went to Indiana, well, not the last time they went to Indiana. Last time we went to Indiana, it was a deluge in more ways than one. But they have opened the season in Indiana with a tough game. Ryan Day was talking about whatever that was, 2017 maybe, where they had kind of they had to pull away in the second half to put that game away. So, we have to be a little bit careful to assume that it's just going to be a complete blowout kind of game. But I also think that there are elements here where Kyle McCord could come in by nature being the starter. It should give him some confidence. It should give him a little bit extra measure of poise. Ryan Day has said he doesn't want these guys, thinking that the first mistake gets you pulled. And he's going to get a chance to be the starting quarterback and play as the starting quarterback, even if that gets interrupted by a series here or there with Devin Brown. So I think that gives him the opportunity to seize this job and run with it. And whether Ryan Day commits to that by week 2 or, Youngstown State's an even better opponent to do this sort of experiment with. So if Devin Brown looks good against Indiana, maybe they just say the same thing. Hey, Kyle McCord's going to start, but Devin Brown's still going to play significant snaps in the first half. There's to do anything else to me just feels a little bit arbitrary at this point. If one guy just isn't performing, you've got the other guy you can put him in and play him. But in the way that these games are setting up, and you want more data, you want real game data to finish making this evaluation and this analysis of the quarterbacks, then take as much time as you want. I think the big question I have really as I look at it is, do you name a permanent starter, like full stop starting quarterback? We're going to operate as a normal starting quarterback before the Western Kentucky game, because do you want to get a full feel of that before you go into Notre Dame and not wait all the way until Notre Dame to turn that over to somebody? I don't know the answer to that, but I I don't know which one of those I think is actually smarter. I might think it's smarter to name a full starter by then. But again, only if you feel like you are secure in that decision. And the reason that they want Devin Brown to play real snaps on Saturday is because he did impress them. And Kyle McCord has had a chance to play real games, and Devin Brown has not. And you need to see what it looks like in real games. And I don't really have a quibble with the way that this is playing out for Ohio State. I would think if I know that there are fans out there that have some consternation about the fact that a full starter hasn't been named, but I think there's merit to the way that this is playing out. The answer will obviously not fully disclose itself till November, but I think there's merit in the way that this is playing out because I think it helps get you to the answer you want, and you don't have to just put an arbitrary deadline on anything.
Well, I think to jump in, so if you don't name a quarterback after week one, like I don't know what the scenario would be for you to name a quarterback after week one, whether it's Kyle McCord is great and Devin Brown doesn't impress, or Kyle McCord's great and doesn't really matter what Devin Brown does. However you want to view that. I think if you don't name one now, you would like a dry run. Like you would like that Western Kentucky game to be.
I think so.
This is what I think. That's kind of what you were alluding to. You want like a dress rehearsal basically before the Notre Dame game. But if I'm being honest, if I'm Ryan Day, I'm not naming a quarterback after. Like if I don't name a quarterback after week one, I'm not naming a full-time starting quarterback to us until after Notre Dame. Like I'm keeping this kind of. I'm keeping this can kicking down the line. Like this is something that you keep moving along because again, this happens a lot in the NFL and you hear it with, football coaches really of any level. You hear them say something like, if they have to prepare for an extra 5 minutes on blank, and it's typically like a swinging gate field goal formation or something like that. If they have to prepare for an extra 5 minutes on that, then that matters. Well, I think that kind of matters here for Devin Brown too. So if you don't name a quarterback after Indiana, like unless you're ready to name a quarterback after Indiana, every week, if I'm Ryan Day, I'm going out and I'm doing the same thing that he did today. And I'm saying, oh, well, Kyle's going to take the first snap, but we're going to work Devin in because theoretically you should be up, not theoretically, probably you should be up on Indiana enough in the second half, like you were saying, where Devin Brown can realistically come in and get some mop up time. And you can play him in the first half if you want to. It's, you can do that. But then Youngstown State, you're going to kill Youngstown State. Western Kentucky, you can also have, again, Western Kentucky might be better than Indiana. Their offense is actually really good, so that you might actually have to kind of score some points in that game. But that's another one where you can play Devin Brown too. So like it's I would not only say realistic, it's probable that Devin Brown is going to play in all 3 games, even if Kyle McCord was the permanent full-time starter. So why not just keep this charade going and just say, you know what, Devin Brown is going to play in all these games and we don't know yet and blah, blah, blah. Because if Notre Dame has to think about this for 10 minutes, then I think it's worth it.
Especially since Ryan Day said that both quarterbacks have strong chemistry with the ones. So you're not worried about, oh no, what if things are out of rhythm against Notre Dame? No, they've worked a lot with these guys. It helps that you've got this many returning starters from a weapon standpoint. Now the offensive line, that's it, but that's cohesion between that 5. Everything else has, and Carson has been working with the ones as a center since back in the spring. So there's plenty of chemistry there. I'm with you, Andrew. The only way I don't think it keeps playing out is because of something Nathan said a couple of pods ago when we were mentioning Michigan and how they had this play out. And maybe there was, I don't know if you said it on a pod or in a meeting actually, but I'm going to say it here. So regardless, people are going to hear about what you said.
As long as I get credit. That's
when
really all that
Michigan
matters.
did it last year, how much of that was, listen, I mean, Caden McNamara, he probably was owed an opportunity given what Michigan had done the year before that, but also the court of public opinion. If you knew your decision already, and it's like the world got to see what you're thinking, so no one's going against it, right? It was almost, so Ohio State kind of had the same thing happen. They just didn't do it on purpose in 21, where because CJ was dealing with a shoulder, we got to see Kyle McCord. And so the court of public opinion now understood why Ryan Day picked CJ Stroud, had they not before. So what if we get out of the Indiana game and the court of Ryan Day maybe already knows who it is in his head, and the rest of the coaching staff, maybe they already know who it is. Maybe they already know who's supposed to be the starting quarterback this year, or at least they have an idea. And then they're going to come out of the Indiana game where that gives you a data point where the offseason was never going to give you it. But also, we get to evaluate it. You can't hide it from us on Saturday. They can't do we're down at the end of the field where we can barely see the quarterbacks and then you kick us out after 30 minutes. No, or just have a simple practice where we don't get to see a lot. No. You, me, people listening to this pod, people not listening to the pod, everybody's going to be able to see which of these quarterbacks is better. And I think Indiana and Western Kentucky might be the perfect teams to have that experiment play out, because Indiana is just weird enough on defense, and it's a road game at 3:30. It's just a weird enough environment to where you can get real data out of it without worrying about actually losing the game. And Western Kentucky is maybe more known for their offense than their defense, but they might score a little bit in a way that Ohio State's got to score. That's perfect. That's a perfect test tube for everybody. Fans, coaches, media, to all come to a conclusion that this person is supposed to be your starting quarterback and nobody's going to argue it.
I think there's something to be said for that. I don't think that's why Ryan Day is doing it, but I think that is a byproduct. I really think they need to see Devin Brown. I mean, they've done so many game simulations and game-like experiences and play, practice in the shoe and et cetera, et cetera. But again, this isn't complete coach speak when Ryan Day says you don't know sometimes until you actually line up out there and another guy who you've never met is coming to kill you, and they've been scheming to the best way to do that for months, and here's how they're doing it. And how do you pick that up? Those things will separate guys a little bit. So I think they need to see what Devin Brown looks like and under those circumstances. But you're not wrong that it was helpful in 2021, because things were at the point with Stroud where it was fair to ask, is this as good as it will be? Because we didn't know the extent of how bad he was hurt in that Tulsa game. So without that valid piece of information, at least the extent of how bad he was hurt, it was fair to say, well, if this is as good as it is, isn't it worth taking a look at Kyle McCord, 5-star top 50? And then we did, and we saw a difference, especially then when Stroud came back healthy. So it will help separate opinions too on Saturday, potentially. Because I think one thing that's happened here is, I don't know that I've talked to anybody who has had the same eyes on these guys that you and I have had, Steven, going back to the spring, who has said, well, Devin Brown's clearly better. I have not heard anybody say that. Nor do they say, Kevin,
but the other way around too.
Is they don't say Kyle McCord is a tier above. But there's nobody who's going out there and saying, well, what are they even thinking about? Devin Brown's clearly better. But I think people hear attributes of Devin Brown. You talked before about the 5-star shine that is on people, and he wasn't a 5-star. So sometimes before you've actually gone in and thrown a pass and had anything at stake, then all you're judged on is the upside of everything about you. And Kyle McCord has had that until he then played a game, and you saw where he still had to go as a football player 2 years ago. So I think that part of the just conventional wisdom kind of conversations that are happening out there is there's a segment of this fan base that only sees the pristine, unsullied upside of all the things Devin Brown is. So by getting him into a game and having actually watch him play real scrimmage reps against another team will either what am I trying to say? It will either dirty that up a little bit, or he will shine. Because that's the other thing that could be happening here, that they keep seeing flashes of him that makes them wonder, maybe this is one of those gamer guys. Maybe it's one of those guys who just the lights come on or the sun gets dim in Indiana on a Saturday afternoon, and something else comes out of him. But they won't know until they play.
Especially with that guy. We've said it enough times. They're not that different athletically, but Devin Brown does use his legs more. He's more, if that makes sense. He's not Justin Fields with the legs, but his game is a little more predicated on him being able to do that. And how much of that can you show? Even in time when they're late to the whistle, they've been late at the 2 practices we watched, but still, it's a difference for both of these guys. They have parts of their games that you can't really tell till it's live. And that's part of this. If you've been able to mark every data point up until the point that it's live, why not just let it be live? Well, and that's what you get on set. Because I haven't heard anything either way. This has not been a situation where we're like, man, it's kind of crazy that this guy hasn't been named the starting quarterback yet. No, there's a lot of coach speak sometimes. I don't think Ryan Day has coach speaked this quarterback battle at all.
Well, it's also, you mentioned, there are certain things you just can't see. I think the scrambling point's a fair one, because that, like if you use your legs more, that's fair. But it's also just, how does one of these two kids react when, all right, it's 3rd and 8 and Indiana brings the house and you get drilled in the ribs and you got to get up because you threw a ball over the middle and you got a first down. And then all of a sudden you got to go play another down. Like, how do you handle that situation because there's 2 minutes left in the half or something like that? So and I think the scrambling point's fair. I just wanted to add that because like there are situations like that when you have rushers coming at you that are like actually allowed to get within. I mean, we've all been to enough football practices in our life where like, especially at some of these camps where for most of the time, if a dude gets anywhere between like a 6-foot COVID like circle of these quarterbacks, the whistle starts to go. Like for a lot of these times, sometimes like you get these defensive linemen away from the quarterback. So I think that's also something there too, where it's, not just can you handle kind of moving outside the pocket? Can you do that? It's how do you handle pressure? And not only that, how do you react when, hey, on 2 straight plays, you get hit and one of these plays you get hit really hard. How do you get up and respond to that? I think that's a part of this as well.
It's like, how did Justin Fields really put himself on Ohio State's Mount Buckmore of quarterbacks? I mean, yes, he threw for yards and ran for yards and got touchdowns. But coming out of the tent against Michigan and throwing a touchdown pass, getting just absolutely sawed in half like a magician's assistant against Clemson, and then coming in and having the game that he did, just dropping bombs on them. Like, that's how you get on Buckmore and how you really make a name for yourself. And I'm not saying that Indiana's going to afford either of these guys the opportunity for full heroism like that, but Andrew's point is a good one, that there is something, like these guys haven't been live in any of these spring practices and any of these preseason practices that we're aware of, certainly none of the ones that we saw. So what happens when these guys are live and you're really playing football? That I think is going to be maybe an eye-opener, or at least has the potential to be. But I also think that Ohio State, I believe Day, because we talk to other people too, we get a vibe of what's going on. And I do believe that there is confidence that both of these guys would react the right way. I think if they thought either of these guys were going to fold under those circumstances, this wouldn't be talked about the way it's being talked about.
But even with the Fields thing, I think we immediately all go to the Michigan game and the Clemson game because those are special moments, right? Those are, I mean, if he wins the Heisman Trophy in either one of those seasons, you look at those moments. But I remember the FAU game early on in that game where he sticks in the pocket and gets like smacked the way that quarterbacks get smacked sometimes, and he lands a dot to Chris Olave. So like the signs that what he did against Michigan and Clemson were already there once the game was live, and you got to see that. What does that mean for C.J. Stroud? Like, we talk about some of the moments he had in the Georgia game. I remember the Rutgers game in 2021 where he's, like, scrambling around the pocket and buying time. And then he hits Chris Olave, who does the rest of the work and goes and gets a touchdown. I'm think that's all stuff that happened in live that you can't really show in practice. So that's where I'm getting at with that one. We're going to take a quick break here. Some other newsy stuff happened, and we'll hit on that as well. But obviously the big thing here is quarterback. We'll come back and we'll touch on anything else Ryan Day and Jim Knowles had to say. And then later in the pod, I'm going to put Andrew and Nathan through an exercise now that we know how this quarterback situation is going to play out, at least for week 1. So more on that when we come back here on Buckeye Talk.